Hello. Hi, Susan.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty good today.
Hi, Kevin.
Hello, how you doing today?
Doing well. Ooh, yawning
It's been a
today.
long day.
Yeah. Sure has. Hi, Shell.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Good. How's it going?
Good, thank you. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good here. How about you?
Yeah, it's been one of those days. I heard the yawn when I first logged in. I'm like, I relate to this.
Yeah. All right. It's 3 o'clock. It looked like we had 10 people sign up for this training. So far, we got 3 on the call. Maybe give it one more minute here. And folks will join. This session is being recorded, and you'll get a link to the recording afterward so you can watch that. It is an open session, and this is FutureFeed training session number 2. And I talk about, let's see, in the first session, I would have covered dashboards, start, people, tools, and documents. In this session, I'm going to talk about the assess dashboard, the SSP area, FutureFeed, your system POAM, and then the deliverables. I usually do get through this part a bit quicker than I do in the first session. Depends if I start rambling. So at the end, be like 10 minutes hopefully left for just Q&A. At that point, you guys would have sat through both end user training number 1 and number 2, and maybe even began starting to do stuff in the tool. And so at the last 10, 15 minutes, I can help you with any specific questions or issues you may be facing or have. Okay. So let me just jump into it. And okay, so this is the assess area. This is where in FutureFeed, you will identify all of the requirements the system has to meet and status of those requirements and identifying implementation and linking evidence. Okay, so right now I'm in a level 2 environment, but if my company also had to meet 853, when I'm working on addressing the 853 controls, I'm still going to do it in this assess area. I would just change my control set that I'm viewing. Okay, so go back to a level 2, and now I will go over each control requirement. Well, not each control requirement, but what you can capture for each control or requirement. So I'm going to go into 318 here, and all of the requirements have these 6 sections. Okay, they have a requirement satisfaction summary. This is where you're identifying status and defining implementation method. The next 3 sections, we titled them um, because we are in the assess area of FutureFeed. So whether you're performing an internal assessment or you're working with an external assessor, all assessors are taught, all CMMC C3PAO assessors are taught to evaluate your level of compliance using these 3 methods here: interview, examine, and test. Those are the 3 assessment methods that all external CMMC assessors are going to use. So if you're doing an internal assessment, we recommend also just following that same assessment methodology, so you can ensure readiness for your assessment and identify any gaps. Okay, so interview, these are the people. I'm wearing my assessment hat now. These are the people that I'm going to want to speak to in order and talk to them and question them and ask them how they are adhering to this requirement or how they are implementing this requirement, how they're enforcing it. Okay. Examine, this is all my documented proof or document artifacts. Okay, this is screenshots, reports, policies, procedures, any security documents. This is where they are housed. So anything that you want to provide to an assessor showing proof that you are meeting 318, as far as documents, that will be found down here under examine. These are things that they are going to examine, they're going to look at to determine if you're compliant. Test. Okay, this is a method used by assessors, and a good assessor, I think every assessor, if I can remember from when I did my training, I'm a lead CCA, by the way, so you can ask me questions, but we are taught to test as much as possible. When someone's performing a test, what they're doing is they are exercising that objective, or they're performing the activity in the requirement or the objective to determine if that output is what was expected. Okay, so here I'm on limit of unsuccessful logon attempts. A test that someone could do here is an assessor may ask for you to create an account for them, and then they may on purpose try to log in several times. And if your company has defined that after the 5th login attempt, my account will be locked out, then the assessor is going to put in the wrong password 5 times and expect that on the 6th attempt, you can't attempt a 6th time because your account's logged out. So that's a test. And typically, when an assessor is performing a test, there's some technology involved, and that's why in FutureFeed under this test section is where you're finding all your technology. Okay, this is all your technology that is both implementing, helping you implement and enforce that requirement, but it's also your technology that is supposed to be implementing that requirement, like down here. So unsuccessful logon attempts, my firewall has login capability. There's a management console, so I have configured my firewall's management console to limit unsuccessful logon attempts. Entra ID itself, administrators, when they log in there, have a limit of logon attempts. But Entra ID is also the tool I'm using to enforce limit of logon attempts for all my Windows assets in my environment, everything that's connected to my domain. I have a policy that's pushing out that limit of unsuccessful logon attempts. Okay, so in here is where you're going to connect the assets that are both picking up and enforcing that requirement. Okay, and then typically when an assessor does a test, it involves some sort of system. So that's where we log that. All right. And then under every requirement, you have a place to log and house additional artifacts or evidence. Just note that if you upload something here, it's only ever going to be found under this requirement. Okay. So if you're kind of new to compliance management and new to working with these requirements, you may not have experienced this yet, but I've been doing compliance frameworks for 15 years or more now, and I've written a lot of system security plans, and I've written a lot of implementation narratives. And what you find yourself doing is when you provide evidence for something, that piece of evidence can be used multiple times. Okay. Give me 1 second. I need to adjust the way I'm sitting. My leg has fallen asleep in this chair. For example, okay, let's say for this one, this screenshot here. This is a screenshot of a limit of logon attempts. This is a screenshot showing that config setting. Okay. Well, that screenshot can be used to show proof that I am meeting this requirement here. But that screenshot maybe I can also use it under my configuration management control 341. Okay. I could also use that screenshot here showing proof that I am meeting my baseline configuration, my approved baseline, because part of my approved baseline is having that limit of logon attempts. Okay. And so that one screenshot could be used for 2 requirements. And in some cases, especially when you get to like, let's see, where do I got one? Right here, acceptable use policy. That's not really a good example, but we'll go with it. We'll roll with it. All right, so here's an acceptable use policy. Also sometimes referred to as rules of behavior. Okay, but this type of document here, typically it's used as a tool to educate users on what they can and cannot do as far as data and information systems. So in this type of policy, it's going to list a lot of here's the things you can do and here's what you're expected, or here's how here's your expected behavior and here's the things you can't do and the things you can do. You know, it can cover a bunch of stuff. So for example, let's pretend that this policy here, it states that don't share your password. It states that when you're done at the end of the day, when you're done working on CUI data, you have to store it in a cupboard or a locked cabinet. It also states that when you're done with CUI data and you no longer need it for retention, that you're supposed to sanitize and, you know, maybe you have to submit that asset to your IT department who's going to sanitize it before disposal or reuse. This AUP also might talk about how users are expected to use the internet and don't go to any external websites you're not supposed to, a whole bunch of stuff. Well, what I just said, all those things I just said, I can map them back to like 5 or 6 requirements. Okay. So typically an acceptable use policy is connected to multiple requirements, definitely 14.7 as you see there, but you can use acceptable use policies as training. Okay, I'm training people on their basic user role of how they should behave. There's a password one in here somewhere around this area. I'm not quite sure where that is, but I think you guys get my point. Let me connect just 1 or 2 more. So let's pretend it mentions all this stuff here. Definitely controlling the flow, right? I'm sure in an AUP, we're telling users what not to do with that CUI data or what they can. Like, don't take it home. Make sure you dispose it. Only share CUI data with authorized people. That's all talking and helping you meet 313, okay? So an assessor now is going to come in and they're going to say, okay, I see you have an acceptable use policy. Show me evidence that you are making your employees read and agree to abide by that acceptable use policy. Or show me evidence that you are educating your users on that acceptable use policy. Okay. So that piece of evidence, let's pretend it's a signed AUP. I have 100 employees. I'm going to go collect 2 or 3 signed acceptable use policies and give this to the assessor and say, here's proof, here's some proof, right? And then also maybe I'll show the assessor that during my onboarding process, during my user onboarding process, I have a checklist, and that checklist has an item on it to make sure the user signs and reads and signs that AUP, right? So that's a piece of evidence, okay? Well, instead of me uploading the signed acceptable use policy, How many controls did I connect it to? For example, in here I said 5. So instead of me uploading that signed AUP and that onboarding checklist 5 times under each control, which you can, I think that's, see, now I went off on a tangent. I was trying to show you that under each control, they have this additional artifacts. So if I uploaded that signed AUP 5 times and I went into every one of those 5 controls here and I uploaded it, that's fine. I now do have evidence associated with every requirement. But the thing is, that's a lot of work to upload it 5 times. And then if you change it or something happens, then you got to delete it 5 times and go upload it 5 more times. Okay. So what you're going to do is this additional artifacts center here, use it when you have a piece of evidence that you can't use elsewhere, and maybe it's directly tied to this one requirement, okay? But in cases where, like, I'm talking to you about the AUP, down here under examine, let's pretend that the AUP was linked and addressing this control here. So I will connect it. Okay. All right. So here's my requirement. Here's the AUP. And now what you'll do is you'll open up that AUP and you'll click on evidence. And over here is where you would upload that signed version or the 3 examples of a signed AUP and your onboarding checklist here. So now you just upload it once here. And because you've connected this AUP to all of these requirements, an assessor, what they're going to do is they're going to go to that control, they're going to read and try to understand how you've implemented this requirement. And then when they want to start looking at proof up here, if you say up here in this summary notes here, let me go to one that makes sense. Role-based training, okay? Here. If in these summary notes, I say, I educate all my CY users on their basic role and responsibility with protecting CY via my, this is terrible, my acceptable use policy. Okay, so if I say that up here, you would have a lot more, you know, you'd talk about all your other security related roles and responsibilities and how those folks, what additional training is required of those folks, right? But all users in your CUI environment have some level of responsibility with protecting CUI, right? They have to protect their own systems, their own information, laptops, they have to follow some rules, right? So here, if I say that I'm educating all my users on their basic responsibility with my AUP, then down below, my assessor is going to find that AUP under the examine section because I would have linked it like that, okay? And now they can click on it and they can view my actual current version of my AUP. This is the one that we currently use. And if I hire someone today, this is the one they're going to read and sign so they can look at it. But then if they want to see evidence that we're using it and it's being enforced, they're going to click over here and now they'll see those examples that I've uploaded and are signed and maybe my onboarding checklist over here. And that evidence, this evidence is all tied, it stays tied together. This evidence stays tied with this asset, and you've connected this asset to these requirements. And so under every one of those requirements, an assessor will find that evidence. Okay, so I digress, but that's artifacts. Eventually, you're going to be uploading evidence into FutureFeed, and if you find yourself uploading something multiple times, there may be a better place to house that and connect it to the requirements. So you only have to upload it once. Okay. Then we have the DoD potential assessment consideration. So here, this is just a few questions These are questions that an assessor would ask. You could potentially hear these come out of the mouths of the assessors you work with in the future for your CMMC assessment, because these are taken straight from the assessor's guide. Um, Hopefully they're not reading these word for word, but these are very good questions to ask yourself or ask people at your company if you are working on and trying to do your own evaluation of this requirement. Now, you don't have to use these, but they're here for if you want to, and you can actually answer them. So this one, objective A, up here, it says information security related duties are defined. Roles, responsibility, duties are defined. Down here are the duties. So you would call up and talk to HR or your training person and ask them, are the duties, roles, and responsibilities that impact directly or indirectly the information security of the company or CUI, is it defined and documented? You can say yes. Okay, if you're saying yes, then essentially you're saying that that objective is met because we have defined roles, responsibilities. So yes, we meet that. And now you're going to start describing how you meet that. Why'd you say yes? Where's that defined? Okay, but if you say no, what you're doing is creating a poem entry because you're saying, no, we don't define that. So now we have, you have to have that defined. So we're going to create a poem entry. And write it a lot better than that and hit submit. So now I have created a poem entry. Now you don't have to use these, but if you're trying to tackle evaluation and addressing these requirements on your own and you're kind of just new to frameworks and cybersecurity, then I definitely would rely on these. Okay. All right, now let's go back up and cover the other sections. So we went over these questions. I don't have anything really further to mention there, nor do I need to talk about the additional artifacts, but I will, let's focus here and then quickly cover interview, exam, and test one more time. So under the requirement satisfaction summary, this is where you are defining well, first, you're identifying if you're compliant or not. Have you implemented that requirement or not? So met or not met. I would expect that if you have things marked as met, then eventually your goal would to have in the summary notes defining how it's met, and then at the objective level as well, defining at the objective level how things are met. Okay, if you have them marked met, then definitely have some description on implementation method. Okay, that's important because there is a requirement for you guys to have a system security plan here. And just so you see, because I get a lot of questions of what to put in my SSP, how to write my SSP. And so I just wanted to, these are what you have to do for an SSP. If it doesn't come from here and it's coming from maybe a consultant or an assessor and they're trying to say that your SSP has to have this, well, if whatever they're saying doesn't align with these objectives, you can push back on them. Okay. But in your SSP, you do have to identify the security requirements, which we're doing. It's the NIST 171, 800 171 security requirements. And you have to define the method of security requirement implementation. Okay. Method of implementation. So when you're working within the controls, in this summary notes area and in the statement objective area is where you're going to define that implementation method. And we just give you 2 spots to do it. Here is typically, we recommend over here, you're summarizing at a high level how the requirement is implemented. Like, what's the whole process? Okay. For example, we're under awareness and training. So here you may talk about at a high level, the organization level, how you guys are doing training. So in here, you may say things like, the company has an onboarding process, and during that onboarding process, we provide the appropriate level of training for that person's role that they were hired for. And during that onboarding process, we also have them sign and read that acceptable use policy. So here you're at a high level. The whole control, the whole process, or the multiple processes that were put in place to meet this requirement. Then down here at the objective level, it's nice to just speak directly to that one objective. So here you're talking at the whole training program, how it's enforced. Down here, it's saying security risks are identified in your training. Okay, well, I don't need the assessor to read this whole thing to get that answer. Here, they're just going to say, I usually end up just regurgitating the objective. Security risks are identified in the CUI training, which is provided during. Something like that. Very short, sweet. I probably even provided too much. I could have just gotten rid of that last part, right? And just said security risks are identified in CUI training. Actually, I like that better. So boom. That would be, kind of short, sweet. Now an assessor knows exactly where to look. Okay, show me that CUI training because I want to look at it to see if there's CUI risks in there, and if your users are being taught on CUI risks, security risks. So the next thing, an assessor, if I was performing an assessment of this environment, now I'm going to close out of here and I want to see that CUI training. All right, so what am I going to do? I'm going to examine a document. So I'm going to find that under this examine. I should find my CUI training down here. It's not because I just made that up, but this is where I would find that training. And so I would link to my training policy, or even link to maybe I uploaded that training slide deck, or I exported that training and I uploaded it somewhere in here. But I would find that here under examine or under additional artifacts. Okay. So at the requirement satisfaction summary, you have two places to define implementation method. And I do recommend describing the high level process or processes that were implemented that support this requirement and potentially support other requirements. And then down here at the objective level, just speak to that objective. That's going to help you for your assessment. Also in this area, there's a video you can watch to learn more about the requirement. You have this internal discussion area. So if you need to have any internal discussions with your team or your customer, here's where you could ask those, hey, do we meet this requirement? Just internal discussions. You have some flags here that you can set. Question, let's set the question flag and submit. Okay. Now, this is not included in your SSP. So this is, and we had to add these labels in here because people were using this summary notes to kind of capture like status or questions, like, but then when they went and exported their SSP, all those internal notes were in that SSP. So you don't want that. So keep things official here. If you have to have internal discussion or notes, then do that here. Now, all of your team members and the users of your environment should know that they don't have to go to this specific requirement to see this discussion. I mean, you can, but you don't have to. These discussion notes here, they're all tied together and they're all displayed up here. So go in the top right under discussions, In here is where you'll see every discussion ever made, and you can see the requirement. So remember how I set that flag, that question flag? Oh, maybe I didn't. Maybe I did. I thought I did. But so here's how you search by, yeah, there it is. You know, if I had a question, maybe there was a finding, some observation, you can categorize your comments and see them here or see them all up over here. And now, you don't have to go into every specific requirement to see if there's notes. You can address them all here and then navigate if you need to that requirement. Okay, so that's that internal discussion area. You can find that as well if I click on this objective A, um, kind of capturing, you know, same you're filling out this data here, either here or over here. But here's another little area to get the discussion. If you want to make discussions at the objective level, if you want to make comments at the objective level, then you open up the objective and click on the objective here, or you can make comments at the control requirement level up here. Okay. So also in this requirement area, you're defining status. So you have met, not met, unknown, not applicable. In FutureFeed, if you mark something not met, for example, this first objective here, objective A is currently met. There are no POA&M items open. If I mark not met, FutureFeed is going to make that first POA&M entry for me. See, now it says number 1. There's one POA&M item open. So just know in FutureFeed, you can get a score pretty quickly because of the automatic calculating of the score in the back. See, this one control is fully met. So I am passing this control. This control is a 5-pointer. Okay. This is one that you do not want to fail in an actual assessment because you'll fail the whole assessment. You can't fail this one during a certification assessment. It's a 5-pointer. You can't fail the 3 and 5 pointers, by the way. Anyway, so this is 5-pointer. Now, if I go down here and mark this one not met, my score automatically changed. Now I just went down 5 more points, because in real life, if you fail one objective in an assessment, you will fail that overall requirement. Okay, there's 2 exceptions there. There's 2 requirements that you can get partial credit. If you fail one objective but you pass the other, you can get partial points. But so in general, rule of thumb, if you fail one objective, you're going to fail the overall requirement. And that's why it's really important when you're evaluating your implementation, when you're designing your implementation, assessing it, do so at the objective level so you can identify if you have any gaps or issues. All right, so when you mark something not met in FutureFeed, it will create that first POA&M item for you. And now you would want to make it a point to open up that POA&M item and tailor it. Okay. You'll see here, it's going to come pre-populated with some just helpful guidance or a narrative related to this requirement. Here it's telling you about what are CUI risks, examples of CUI risks, right? So this is just meant to be helpful, but definitely you would tailor this to fit your environment. So maybe I already have a CUI training, so all I need to say is training admin, update the CUI training to include CUI risks, C below for guidance, right? So there's my POA&M. Now it is tailored to my environment because I'm telling them specifically what I have to do. I don't need to make a whole new CUI training. We already have one. We just need to update that one, okay? Assign it to the person that needs to do the work. Definitely try to get the accountable so you can make sure someone's managing that person and making sure they're getting their work done. Impact, effort, cost, due date. Now I've just tailored this POA&M, close it out. Now I still have one POA&M. Here it is, okay? So, and I can make 2 POA&Ms for an objective if I need to. All right. So if I need to, for whatever reason, maybe I needed to make a second poem for this, I can. And now I have 2 POA&M items for this one objective. We gave you the ability to do that because some companies like to be very clear with their POAMs, and they'll have, for example, if they have to implement something technical, they may have a POAM for how to implement uh, that technical requirement in Linux and assign that POAM to their Linux admin, but then they may want to create another POAM. Same thing, you have to implement that technical requirement, but now you have to implement on my Windows, and so I'm going to assign that to my Windows. And maybe I have a cloud environment that needs to be configured, so I'll create a third one and assign it to my cloud admin so he knows to implement that requirement there. So you can choose to put all that in one POAM or separate POAMs, very flexible, so you can manage POAMs and issues however you'd like. Inheritance is probably the only thing we haven't talked about in this page right here. So what inheritance is, if you have any external service providers that are providing services for your company, and those services are storing, processing, or transmitting CUI or FCI data, then those services are involved. But also if those services, let's say those services are just, typical external service provider services like vulnerability scanning or performing incident response plan testing or just patching your systems, right? They're not storing, processing, transmitting CUI, FCUA data. The external service providers, they don't need to access your CUI data, but they are accessing your CUI systems to perform security related services, right? So what inheritance is if you have any external service providers, and they are performing a service to help you meet the requirements. So let's go under that vulnerability scanning one. Okay, let's say I'm a small company, and I needed vulnerability scanning services. I don't have an IT team. I don't even have a system admin. So I paid a local company to do vulnerability scanning for me. So down here at the objective level, objective A, the frequency to scan for vulnerabilities is defined. I'm going to leave that no inheritance. This one, I want my company should define this frequency. I need to tell that vulnerability scan, that service provider, run my vulnerability scans weekly or run them monthly or run them, more frequently. So objective A is my responsibility to define. Now, objective B, vulnerability scans are performed. Okay. Like I said, I'm not a system admin and I don't have anybody who can do that. I am not running those vulnerability scans. I'm paying someone to do it and to do it within the defined frequency that I specified. So I'm going to mark this fully inherited because for example, that vulnerability scanning that's being provided it's scanning all of my systems in my environment, and so it's fully inherited. Okay, that's what this icon is. It's identifying shared responsibility with regards to external service providers, if you have some external service provider engagement there or not. Now, if the vulnerability scanning that they were performing did not cover all of my in-scope assets for whatever reason, then it would have been partially inherited. Okay. Your inheritance status here, this icon, should match. We recommend that it matches your statement. So if I say something is fully inherited here in my statement, it should say fully inherited, which would be the second statement. This objective is implemented by MSSP, see the CRM, and you can provide more details if you want. So your statement should align with this inheritance, and it's just a quick way to, from an assessor point of view or from compliance management point of view, it's a quick way for you to visually see where you have external service provider engagement when it comes to these requirements, okay? So that's everything in the satisfaction summary section. Just a quick preview of these sections. Interview, like I said, these are all the people responsible, accountable, or need to be involved to some degree with this one requirement. Okay, vulnerability scanning. So these are the people responsible for performing all of objectives. Well, how many was there? 5, 4. So A through E. These are the responsible people for performing all the objectives, A through E. Accountable. This is the person that at your company who ultimately is responsible for making sure that the people here are doing their work. Okay. Consulted. This is anybody internal or external to the company. Do you need to consult with someone? If there's issues with this requirement, if this requirement fails an assessment, if maybe you want to change something with this requirement, you want to change your definition here that you defined in objective A. So any of those type of things, do you need to consult with someone first? Either internal or external to the company, or do you need to inform anybody internal or external if there's a change in something, okay? Now everybody you link here, these are all potential interviewees for any third-party assessors. Examine, this is all your proof. Okay, so up here under the documents, we talked about this in training 1. Documents is where you log all of your security documentation and you connect it to the requirements. So when you do that, that's your evidence, that's your proof that you are meeting that requirement and you are doing what you say you are doing. So all of that shows up here under examine. Test, like I said, this is where your technology. So here under role-based risk awareness training, really I only had to connect one asset. Let's see if I even have it. I'm going to connect my training tool. I don't know if I have a training tool, fake one in here. But that's what I would connect to this one is I would go over here under assets and maybe it's on-prem. The mission is training and awareness tool. And let's say we use no before, and that is hosted in the cloud. And then log. All right. So now either through this interface or the other interface, let's do it for here. Since we're here, I'm going to go click on that know before asset, connect it to the requirements 3.2, and probably the other ones as well, all of them. Okay. So now that's how I just added. If I go back in there, you're going to see now that know before technology is found under test. Okay. No? Why didn't it take? No before? Connect? Well, I didn't do 3, 2, 1, I guess. Okay. All right. I can jump to the requirement from here, but just to show you, go this way as well. 3, 2, 1, down under test. There's my know before. And if I wanted to add it, I could have done here and just navigated it. But I'm trying to show you the difference, okay? So, yeah. Any questions about the assess area? Eventually, hopefully, everything's green, maybe a couple gray for not applicable, but how FutureFeed is going to help you, or if you're a service provider listening in on this training, how it's going to help your customer, your client, is when you bring them into an assessment, when they're preparing for that assessment, scheduling the assessment, providing the evidence, all of that, you should be able to do all of that in from FutureFeed or with FutureFeed's help, you can go under here under deliverables, export all of your data. When you're working with the assessor to schedule the assessment, all of the people that you have identified in interview here should be available that week of the assessment. I think I said this already in the meeting, but I am a CCA. And so when I do assessments, we will work with the company to come up with a schedule. And it will be something like, on Tuesday, we're going to evaluate the AT requirements, and we're also going to evaluate the personnel security requirements, and maybe we'll also review something else, right? And so on Tuesday, we're going to cover AT and what did I say? AT and PS. Well, so on Tuesday, please make sure that the people responsible here for all these AT controls is available on Tuesday and sitting in on that meeting so I could talk to them. Okay. And then on Wednesday, we're going to cover audit and accountability, AC and IA. So make sure your IT department and all your system admins are available to have that discussion. Okay. So when you're planning for the assessment, preparing for the assessment, and also in the assessment, this assess page is going to be super powerful. It's definitely going to help you plan fully for that assessment. But then during the assessment, as you're sitting in that assessment with that assessor and they're interviewing you or they're interviewing someone else, we strongly recommend that you have up and visible to your team your FutureFeed environment. So as you're sitting with that assessor, and let's say they're going over the AT family, they start and they're like, okay, let's move on to AT321. Well, quickly click on A3T, navigate along with them, follow along with them in FutureFeed. So as you're sitting in that assessment, if the assessor asks someone how about anything specific about this requirement or what was implemented, maybe that person would like a little refresher, or they'll glance over here quickly at FutureFeed and just read, and oh yeah, that's how we did that. Or, if the assessor asks for some evidence for you to show something, you could quickly scroll down and open it up and show it to that assessor right then and there in the meeting. Okay, so we do recommend that you follow along during your assessment. Have FutureFeed up and follow along so you can refresh your memory on how your company's addressed that requirement. You can identify who needs to be speaking during that interview, and show evidence that maybe the assessors missed. Okay. And then also once you set this up fully, it's good for you internally. So when you're internal to your company, when you guys have to do that annual assessment or your continuous monitoring efforts, you'll be visiting this assess area to track status or get an idea of how to evaluate or what evidence to collect. Okay. So if there's no questions on the assess page, I'm going to go over to this SSP. Not too much to be said here. Okay. This system security plan page is essentially just a browser view of your SSP. So you can go under deliverables, go under SSP report, and you can export a big, 50, 60, 70 page system security plan Word document right here. This is what you would do when you have to provide it to the assessor. But instead of you having to generate and export that system security plan and then open up that Word document and review the Word document for accuracy, what you would do is you would review your system security plan here in the browser. So that way you can easily navigate the different sections of your SSP. But then also if there's something missing or incorrect, you can edit that data real quickly. Okay. So for example, this is an easy fix, right? If my system unique identifier was wrong, I'm just going to hit the edit button. And now I'm in the area where I capture that information in FutureFeed. So let's change that. And now I go back to my SSP. Well, that's been changed. Okay. So reviewing and editing the data is a lot easier in this interface. There is some data in here that you are filling out directly in here. It's not being filled out or pulled from another place in FutureFeed. So you will go through the different sections, and where you see red, that means there's there's something that's missing and no data, something needs to be filled out. So here I need to fill out my listing of technologies and users. Under system environment, it looks like, I'm missing my topology and my hardware and software listings. I have not provided those yet. Okay. So when you're ready, after you've populated the people, you've populated tools, documents, you have assessment results in FutureFeed, then your system security plan should be pretty filled out. There should be a decent amount of data in here. Now you could start reviewing the system security plan and seeing where you have some major gaps in your compliance or in your overall plan, and addressing the red where data is missing. Okay, up here you can assign the different sections of the page. Here I'm going to assign the system info to myself, right? But maybe over here I'm going to assign topology. I'm going to assign that to my IT administrator, because he's the one making that topology, and he's also going to be the one giving me my hardware software lists. Okay, so use this compliance review here to assign different sections of your SSP to someone, meaning that person is responsible for, maybe populating that data or managing that data. You can also track review of that data and even have someone approve that data that's displayed. Okay. Reviewing, editing, and approving SSP content. You can do that here in your SSP browser. And then when you're ready, go over to deliverables and now run that SSP report. And that export should be, you should have a high level of confidence that that export is accurate because you reviewed that data in the tool before you generated it. Okay. That's how you're doing in the SSP area. Any questions about this SSP subway stop? All right, then FutureFeed. Let's move on here. This is your system POA&M. This is your FutureFeed system POA&M. So all throughout FutureFeed, as you were marking things as failed or not met, as you marked maybe you marked certain documents as pending down here. These are all my pending documents. These are all things that are in draft and that we're working on. So all of these things are on my POA&M. All these documents are on my POA&M. Tools, any tools that I marked pending, meaning my company is planning to acquire that tool or acquire that service. Okay, these are all on my system POA&M. Of course, if you choose to upload vulnerability scan reports, open vulnerabilities then are tracked on your POA&M. And then under your tools and services, you can even make individual POA&M items specific to tools. Okay, so here I made a POA&M item for my firewall because I need someone to update my firewall to the approved configuration baseline. Okay. So all throughout FutureFeed, you're making POA&Ms for any non-compliance or system flaws or gaps, and then they're all listed here. Now, how I approach managing POA&M items, right now in this environment, we have 79 open POA&M items. That's not too bad. You could get up to hundreds or more POA&M items, right? But when you're doing POA&M management, now there's no specific requirements on how to manage POA&Ms in CMMC. You do have to have a system POA&M, and you do have to work toward remediation, right? But there's no specific guidance on what needs to be in a POA&M or how frequently you should update POA&M items, that kind of stuff. Now, when you get into big organizations or when you get to working with DoD, they have very specific POA&M guidance, and they have policies that talk about using POA&Ms and how they should be managed and who's responsible for tracking POA&Ms, and maybe only certain people at the company are authorized to close out POA&Ms. And maybe you have a whole closure POA&M process where someone submits the evidence and then that evidence is reviewed. And once approved, someone else closes it out. So it's up to your guys' company on how you want to manage POA&Ms. And yeah, but how I like to do it in FutureFeed anyway is I have 79 POA&M items open right now. And instead of me clicking into all 79 POA&M items here and trying to figure out, is work still ongoing? Is there any roadblocks? Who do I have to contact to even get a status update? My goal would try to reduce the number of individual items that I have to follow up on, individual items that I have to track. And to do that, we've implemented the project builder for you. So now instead of 79 individual items, I'm going to group all of the items, as it makes sense for me. Maybe I want to put all the items together that my system admin is working on. Maybe I'll put all, those into one project. Or maybe all of my security documentation will go into one project. Or you guys get to design your projects and build them out and group them however you want. It's typically grouped on like non-compliance or the people responsible for doing the work. So now in here, a trick is if you filter on this proposed project column over here. So if it's filled out, that means this POA&M item 353 is part of, it looks like 2 projects. It's part of my MFA deployment project, and I also have it part of the system admin work project. Now, if you filter again, all these things that have a plus sign, these ones are not part of a project. Okay, so I want to get them in a project so I don't have to follow up on them one at a time. So this one here, this one, lists a document. This is a document POA&M item. Something needs to be developed. So I'll check that one. Let's see if I get any other documents. Let's see. Kind of. Here, something defined. Type of transactions and functions need to be defined. So there's a definition. So anyway, group them however you want. And now we're going to add to project. Either I'm going to create a new project or add it to an existing. Okay, so I already do have a security documentation project ongoing. Maybe I have a tech writer or I've hired a third-party company to help me with CMMC documentation development. So add it to there. Okay, now if I go under projects, here's all of those items that I have to work on. So my goal would be to try to put most everything in a project. Sometimes you'll have 1 or 2 items that aren't going to fit. But then occasionally when I have to wear my POA&M management hat and check in on my POA&M status, now I'm going to go to the FutureFeed area and just start first by looking at all my projects and following up on those. And then maybe I have 1 or 2 one-off items that I need to kind of follow up on or maybe build a whole new project for. Okay. So that's the FutureFeed POA&M. You can export data to CSV here in Excel here. If you're using any project management tools outside, other than FutureFeed, then you could export the data and upload it there. To close a POA&M item, you just hit complete POA&M item. It will prompt you optional to provide closeout notes. If you want, I would recommend defining or summarizing, what was done, why you're closing it out, and then just hit mark complete. So I just marked that one complete. You have the ability to email directly from FutureFeed POA&M to your ticketing system here. If you've enabled that, where you enable that is over under start, under settings, you can enable ticketing system integration. And so I would be sending an email to my ticketing system for this POA&M item. And I even could put some status notes here if I wanted and hit send. So you do have to have that enabled, but we provide that capability. All right, so the last thing we have to cover is this deliverables, and we're at time. See, I do talk a lot. I'm sorry. I don't have a meeting after this. Feel free to stick around. I will stay on as long as you need and answer all your questions. But let me just show you here under deliverables, you have the ability to export all your files and data. You definitely would do, probably, I would expect that at some point you're going to go over here and do this files export. And that's when you have to provide all your body of evidence to your C3PAO, whatever you want to give them, all your policies and procedures and your SSP, all that stuff. That's what you're going to do here. When you generate this export, it's going to be a zip file. In that zip folder, there will be a Excel file in there. Open that up, and that's going to be your, what's it called? Table of contents, if you will. So there'll be a table of contents in there. There'll be a file that lists out all your evidence files that were exported, and it will also list out the requirements that are tied to that evidence. That's telling the C3PAO assessor, look at this piece of evidence. When you're trying to evaluate AC311, here's all of the evidence I provided for AC311 for you to look at. So check out that export file and see how the files are named. They have a naming scheme. Familiarize yourself with it, because I would expect you would do that for your C3PAO assessment. I see we have a question in the chat. 1 second. I have like one more minute of talking. All right. In your SSP, this is where you're going to run an SSP report. Just hit download. Note here, you can track some administrative metadata. So if I ran and generated an SSP, if I clicked on this button, I'm not going to do it. It will generate me an SSP. It's going to show that in the history table here every time I've generated an SSP. Now I'll go down to the one that I generated. These are all readiness. See how if you hover over it, this one is an SSP. This one, it was a report that I generated. So you would go to your SSP one. Here's one. And let me clear out what it looks. Let me delete all this. So yours is going to be blank. And you click on this approve this report stamp. In here, you can track to see, maybe you submitted to SPURS and that SSP aligns with that SPURS submission. You can make some version notes. You can track approval, who approved it, and if you even have that person sign in, they can, log that they've approved that version. So there's some administrative data you can track in the history. In POA&M, here is where you export your POA&M. This is only an export to Word. If you did want to get export to CSV or Excel, do that over here under your system POA&M. And then presentations, here's where you can quickly build and put together some reports or presentations, pulling the data out of FutureFeed and putting it in a nice presentation. So play around with that. You just select what you want visible for that presentation. For example, if you're going to meet with your CEO and you just want to show him your score. Maybe you want to get the score in there, and also maybe you want to present also the poem anatomy and just a high level metrics of how many failures you have. So select the data you want. There, it expands a decent amount of data that you can choose from, and hit play or download, and now you're creating a report, and it should just show what you've selected. And so here, just my score, the date, and then here's my poem anatomy, and it's semi-interactive. Okay. So I'll stop talking, open up the floor for questions. We have now covered kind of the whole interface. Feel free to ask away. Let's see. We have no, Stuart, when you export, and that's a very good question. Okay. So when you do have to engage with that C3PAO, at some point and it's typically at the end of the assessment, you do this, because during your assessment, during that week of your assessment, it's very common that you're going to be generating and providing new evidence. Okay, so during your assessment, they may say, oh, I never got that policy. Please provide that to me. Or, oh, can you please generate me and export a report of every user that's done training for the past year? You'll have to provide that report to them. That's all evidence. So throughout your assessment, if you get additional requests for evidence for something, do make sure not only you provide it to the assessor, but you upload it into FutureFeed. If that assessor is using your FutureFeed environment to do the assessment, then you only have to upload it to FutureFeed and then tell the assessor it's ready for them to view in FutureFeed. But put it into FutureFeed, because at the end of the year assessment, then again, go over here into exports and generate another file export. Now, this is the package of evidence that you will be required to keep for 6 years, and you have to hash it. So no, it does not, when you generate this, it will not be hashed. You're going to go and follow the DoD hashing guidelines, and the DoD has even provided a DoD hashing tool for you to provide, so that you'll take that zip file and then you'll hash it, and you'll get all your checksums and all that stuff, and then retain it for 6 years. At this time, FutureFeed doesn't have hashing capability, but our CEO is tracking that requirement and looking at potentially making it a feature in the future. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one. Hey, Rachel. You're doing a great job. Thank you. I was curious where on the roadmap FutureFeed is with launching the level 3 controls.
That's a very good question. I wish I can give you the exact timeline on that. The best advice I can give you right now is I would ask that you, actually, I'll do it for you. I can create a help desk ticket for you. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a help desk ticket for you. I am going to put your name in that ticket though. So you will get probably an email notification. But then, so you don't have to submit it. Now I'm saying let's submit a request, because the person who has that answer is the CEO of FutureFeed, and he will get that request, and then he will be able to answer that. I actually just asked last week where we're at with level 3 CMMC. And from my understanding, there's not been too many asks for level 3 in here. And so that may have not been, it may not be high up on the list of priorities. But if you reach out, then he'll see that, people want it still, and it may move up in the list of priority work for the dev team.
Perfect. And then if you don't mind adding, if it's not in the future roadmap, what your recommendation is for how we manage those controls and the evidence.
Okay. I'm with you. I think this is in there very, very soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. Well,
Thank
as
you
usual,
very
you guys
much.
can sign up for several of these or attend the Thursday 30-minute session that I host every week. reach out to FutureFeed if you have questions. Thanks for your time. I hope you
Thank
guys.
you, Rachel.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye, Shell. See you next week.
Yes, looking forward to it. Bye-bye.
Bye.